You get fucked up, you drag me down the hall by my hair, Cassie wrote on May 2nd. I'm 30 years old. This isn't play anymore, she added. I was scared of your rage. I talk out of line sometimes and I do apologize, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. And your love shouldn't equate to what you do for me. These weren't offhand arguments, they were red flags painted in all caps, ignored for years. You get fucked up, you drag me down the hall by my hair, Cassie wrote on May 2nd. I'm 30 years old. This isn't play anymore, she added. I was scared of your rage. I talk out of line sometimes and I do apologize, but that doesn't mean I don't love you. And your love shouldn't equate to what you do for me. These weren't offhand arguments, they were red flags painted in all caps, ignored for years. It was never just about parties or chaos. Beneath the surface was something colder: control. The jury was shown text messages between Sean Diddy Combs and his ex-girlfriend, singer Cassie Ventura. The messages dated back to 2017, but their tone, timelessly disturbing. The Cassie messages: fear, control, and that's where the cracks start to show. Not just in the timeline, but in the trust, in what she was told and what actually happened. But if Jane's story raised eyebrows, Cassie Ventura's texts would bring everything to a boil. And while Combs' legal team insists Jane was a willing participant, the messages tell a more complicated story. Secret schedules were written out in iPhone notes. One read, "Be ready or Wild King Night at her hotel." Another added, "Most likely, Wild King Day continued at hotel." Jane testified she was led to believe there would be no hotel nights during that trip. One trip stood out: December 2021. Flight records showed Jane flew to Miami with a male entertainer named Sly. Hotel bills from the St. Regis clocked $6,000 in damages. Texts revealed Jane and Sly coordinated their arrival. Who invited them? Who paid for it? The answer, prosecutors suggest, always leads back to Combs. But Jane's involvement didn't stop. The data shows a stark shift right after May 19, 2024. The day Combs posted an Instagram apology for assaulting Ventura, just 2 days after CNN released the now infamous 2016 surveillance video. In it, Combs appears to shove, kick, and drag Ventura down a hallway. That clip changed everything. And suddenly, the man who had operated in the open was retreating into shadows. Before the world knew about Cassie Ventura's lawsuit, the one that would send shockwaves through the industry, these encounters almost always took place in hotels. But after that, the locations changed. No more hotel bookings, no more room service. Everything moved underground. According to Homeland Security agent Joseph Cerciello, prosecutors compiled a chart tracking Jane's interactions with Sean Combs from May 2021 to August 2024. Each entry was backed by hotel logs, flight data, financial transfers, and thousands of encrypted messages. The pattern was undeniable. Jane wasn't a casual guest. She was part of a tightly controlled cycle, one that seemed to orbit around Combs's increasingly strange private rituals. She's never shown her face, and her real name hasn't been made public. In court records, she's just Jane. But make no mistake, she is central to everything. Jane's role and the shifting patterns. And the cash? It flowed in silence. Paul once handed over $5,000 in cash before a Wild King night. Another assistant admitted to leaving money in an envelope at a hotel front desk. No receipts, no questions, just discretion. The entire process was rehearsed, polished, hidden in plain sight. But while the team moved like clockwork, the events themselves left behind a trail that would eventually be impossible to erase. And the deeper investigators looked, the more that trail pointed to one name: Jane. But these nights weren't only about partying. They were about control. Paul wasn't just setting up rooms. He was cleaning them afterward, wearing gloves to handle the aftermath. Towels piled high, liquor bottles scattered, the scent of baby oil everywhere. In one cleanup, he spotted a white powder he believed was drugs. Everything had to be seamless. Paul testified that Combs wanted his assistants to operate like SEAL Team 6. Not assistants, operatives. Mistakes weren't tolerated. In one incident, Paul forgot Combs's Lululemon fanny pack before a walk. He was fired on the spot, told not to show his face. That night, Combs's chief of staff sent him to set up a hotel room anyway. And just like that, he was back on duty. According to Brendan Paul, one of Combs' former assistants, these nights followed a specific checklist: baby oil, alcohol, small toiletries, extra towels, sex shop outfits, cash, always cash. The team had it memorized. Sometimes Paul would grab the supplies himself. Other times he was sent on last-minute missions, like the night he raced to a sex store, snapped a photo of some risque outfits, and waited for approval that never came. They weren't just parties. They were planned, choreographed even, right down to the last drop of baby oil. Inside Sean Diddy Combs' inner circle, they had a name: Wild King Nights, and once you knew the phrase, you couldn't unsee the pattern. The hotel damage, the urgent cash drops, the unmarked packages. They weren't random. They were part of a routine. The Wild King Nights blueprint.
In one instance,
Combs allegedly sent a message instructing a woman, known only as Jane, to wire $1,100 to an escort service for flights and an overnight rate. In another, one of his assistants texted urgently, "Need $3,500 cash ASAP for his guest. I'm going to take it to her." And then there was the room that reeked of baby oil, towels drenched, carpets soaked, windows blacked out. The only thing more unsettling than the mess was how routine it had all become. But what these rooms concealed wasn't just physical chaos, they were the first clues in a much bigger machine. But this wasn't just one night gone wrong. It was a pattern. Hotel records, text messages, and financial charts shown to the jury tell a story of consistent behavior, where each stay came with damage, a revolving cast of unnamed guests, and escalating expenses that suggested something far more chaotic happening behind closed doors. A $3,750 charge here, and $1,800 fee there. And every time the same ingredients: anonymous bookings, late-night texts, and requests for urgent cash deliveries. It started with a name that wasn't his. Joseph Chavez. That's the alias used to book a luxury hotel room in Los Angeles in early 2023, a room that would end up costing thousands in damage fees. But the money wasn't the strange part. It was what was left behind: stained furniture, baby oil-soaked carpets, linens beyond repair, and a cleanup note that described bodily fluids smeared across hard wood floors. The kind of scene that doesn't happen by accident, and definitely not alone. Hotel rooms, aliases, and damages. Sean Diddy Combs isn't just a mogul. He's the man who turned bad boy into an empire, shaped the sound of a generation, and built a legacy of wealth, influence, and unshakable dominance. But behind the platinum plaques and champagne-drenched celebrations, a darker narrative is emerging, one told not through headlines or press releases, but through hotel invoices soaked in baby oil, encrypted text messages, and assistants whose loyalty nearly destroyed them. In a case that's as bizarre as it is damning, federal prosecutors have peeled back a version of reality where nights were labeled Wild King, where NDAs replaced trust, and where no detail, not even a fanny pack, was left to chance. This isn't about fame anymore. It's about what was hidden behind it. And what's being uncovered? is far more disturbing than anyone was ready for. For years, the whispers were everywhere. In back rooms, in blogs, in lyrics. But nobody ever thought it would come to this. Private jets, luxury suites, stacks of untraceable cash, and a man who allegedly turned the music industry into his personal playground of control. What started as speculation has now unfolded under oath, in a federal courtroom, where loyalty meets silence, and silence is cracking. But it wasn't just one fight. Between March 12th and 18th, 2017, the two exchanged more messages, each more telling than the last. "You beat my head in," she wrote, then corrected. Beat, she called him crazy. He called her defiant. "You treat me like a hooker, to be honest," she texted. "This hooker has been here for 10 years. Her words cut deeper than any courtroom testimony. They revealed a relationship defined by imbalance, of power, of pain, of manipulation, disguised as love. And still, Combs insisted she was the one acting out. "You started all of this," he wrote, brushing off the violence like it was just noise in the background. These messages weren't just digital records. They were emotional autopsies. Post-mortems of a relationship that many thought was glamorous, but behind the scenes was rotting from the inside out. But if the messages were haunting, the testimonies would become even darker, especially once the assistants started talking. The assistants who knew too much. The bigger the empire, the more hands it takes to keep it standing. And in Sean Diddy Combs's world, assistants weren't just errand runners. They were shields, fixers, and silencers. Brendan Paul was one of them. Young, ambitious, and fresh out of college when he joined Combs's staff in late 2022. What he expected was a crash course in the music industry. What he got was a front-row seat to something much darker. Paul testified he worked 80 to 100 hours a week, always on call. His salary? $75,000, later bumped to $100K, but no amount of money prepared him for what the job truly entailed. He packed Combs' bags, set up hotel rooms, and picked up drugs. Ecstasy, ketamine, cocaine, marijuana. Paul admitted to sourcing them all. Sometimes he paid dealers directly. Other times the packages were waiting, always for Combs, always quiet. The jury saw text messages from February 2024 where Paul coordinated with a dealer. When asked if the drugs were for him or Puff, Paul answered bluntly, "Puff, but please don't disclose that. You can tell whoever it's for me." There was loyalty, but also fear. Paul admitted that when he was arrested in March 2024 at a Miami airport, caught with cocaine in his bag, he didn't say a word about who it really belonged to. Why? Loyalty? He said. That single word echoed through the courtroom like a confession. He wasn't the only one. Another assistant, Jonathan Perez, was seen in messages requesting thousands in cash for a guest. Other texts showed a quiet financial network moving funds around Combs' orbit. $5,000 here, $3,500 there. No explanations, just names, just locations, just obedience. And while Paul insisted he never saw Jane unwilling during a wild king night, his role, and others, was to ensure everything looked seamless, to make sure no one asked the wrong questions, and that if something went wrong, it didn't reach the outside world. These weren't just assistants. They were handlers, logistics experts, damage control agents, SEAL Team 6, just like Combs wanted. But loyalty only goes so far. And as the walls closed in, silence turned into subpoenas, and those once in the shadows were now under the spotlight. Because next came the receipts, money trails, hotel destruction, and the unmistakable signs that this was more than just reckless partying. Conclusion: the fall of a king, or just another chapter? Sean Diddy Combs wasn't just a rapper or a producer, he was the architect of an empire. A mogul. A symbol of hustle and power. For decades, he played the game better than anyone else. He knew how to build a brand, how to control a room, and how to keep secrets buried. But some shadows grow too large to hide. From luxury hotels soaked in baby oil to cryptic texts and silent transactions, this trial has peeled back a world that operated behind closed doors. A world where power was unchecked, money masked damage, and silence was currency. The assistants, the security, the managers, they weren't just working for a superstar. They were keeping the machine running, one wild king night at a time. And at the center of it all was a man who demanded loyalty above all else, even when it meant watching people cover for him, lie for him, and take the fall. But the silence broke. Cassie spoke up. Jane left a trail, and federal investigators listened. Now, as the jury edges closer to a verdict, the question isn't just about guilt or innocence. It's bigger than that. It's about what happens when someone who built his career on being untouchable finally faces the consequences of what was happening behind the curtain. Is this the collapse of a king? Or just another celebrity story that fades with time? Only the jury can answer that. But for the rest of us, the cracks in Combs' empire are no longer whispers, they're headlines. And the story? It's far from over.